Welcome to Journal Club. If you're new here, Journal Club is where we read an academic article and we summarize it. Today, we're here with me, Dr. Kristen Summer, Dr. Laura Gainch, and Jess Guy, who is very nearly finished a PhD, I assume. Jess, can we confirm?
Yes, very nearly finished.
So almost a doctor, so almost Dr. Jess Guy. So today the article we're talking about is titled, I've got to find the title, hold on. Associations between maternal apology, parenting, and child internalizing, externalizing, and prosocial behaviors. Now, friends, I'm pretty sure that no one listening, none of you guys that are listening, have any idea what child internalizing, externalizing, or prosocial behaviors are. So let's do a quick recap. Internalizing behaviors are things like anxiety and depression. Externalizing behaviors are things you see the child produce outwardly. So that's things like, I think they actually defined it in here as fidgeting, like not being able to sit still, but it can be things like aggression as well in the literature. And then prosocial behaviors are, well, positive social behaviors that children show towards other people. So like looking after a child that is younger than them, including someone who's been left out, that kind of thing. So what they're looking at is whether mothers' apologies or their propensity to apologize to their children impacts on internalizing, externalizing, and prosocial behaviors, how it relates to the parents' parenting styles. But they also looked at apology effectiveness, which is a little bit different. And I think this one might actually be really helpful for the parents listening at home, because it actually talks about, like, in the literature, there is coding schemes for what makes an apology effective. So we'll cover that a little bit later. But what they essentially found, and I'm going to read this from the abstract because we're going to dive into the rest of it later. But what they found was that maternal proclivity to apologize, so that's how much the mum intends to apologize, and this is only mothers, was positively associated with involvement, so how much the parent is involved with the child, positive parenting, and child prosocial behaviors. And it's negatively associated with inconsistent discipline, meaning that parents who are more inclined to apologize more consistently discipline their child, not based on their mood. And it's also negatively associated with child internalizing behaviors, which means that those children are less anxious and depressed if their mother is more likely to apologize. All things that are pretty logical. Proclivity to apologize actually predicted children's prosocial behaviors beyond any other kind of parenting, which is really interesting because parenting, like positive parenting, we know has a relationship with prosocial behaviors. So that's cool. And then apology effectiveness, which is actually like a objective coding of whether mothers that, like, basically they were asked an example of how they would apologize in a certain situation if they did something wrong. And we can read out that vignette later if you guys are interested in talking about it. But the apology effectiveness was inversely related with inconsistent discipline, which means that more effective apologies were related with more consistent discipline rather than disciplining children based on your mood. What else? It was also inversely related with positive parenting, which is a confusing one that we will talk about later, and child externalizing behaviors, which means that if your apology is effective, your child is less likely to show those more outward negatively perceived behaviors as well. So that is essentially what they found. Now, let's just kind of leap straight on in. Laura, what did you think about this paper and where should we start in discussing it?
So I'm happy that they're doing such research, first of all, because I feel like we need more interest in, the relationships and mothers especially, but hopefully both parents can gain more accurate information, not facts, but more information as to what they want to do, what results they want for their kids and stuff like that. So I thought that was really interesting. It is not my area of expertise, as you guys know. So even the word proclivity was like, wait, what? What is this? I've never heard this. Okay, I'm not a native speaker either, but So I was really interested, and also, you know, the association with the positive parenting. I'm curious, and I haven't read every single detail, but did they define positive parenting, what it is exactly in that paper?
So positive parenting is actually measured, so they have a scale here. So mothers' parenting behaviors were measured using the Alabama Parenting Questionnaire. So this had 42 questions that map onto 5 dimensions. So 5 different subtopics of parenting behaviors, I guess you'd call it. So one of them was parental involvement, and the example they give is that you volunteer to help with special activities that your child is involved in. Another one is positive parenting, which is the one you asked about, and the example they give is you let your child know when he or she is doing a good job with something. So that's there. I think it's more just like praise based. I'd have to look at the survey though to see what other questions they have in there. That would be really interesting. The other ones in that scale are poor monitoring and supervision. So, e.g., your child is out after dark without an adult with him or her. And another one's inconsistent discipline. The punishment you give your child depends on your mood. So that's that inconsistent discipline one. And then this one I found really exciting, and I want to know what you guys think about it. Did I say really exciting? I meant interesting, not exciting. The other one was corporal punishment. Like, for example, you spank your child with your hand when she or he has done something wrong. Now, it's really interesting. I don't know what led to this, but it says, due to our anonymous online study design and ethical concerns about the reporting of child abuse, we opted to exclude the 3-item corporal punishment subscale from our study. So they actually didn't look at anything to do with corporal punishment and apology, which would have been really interesting. But I'm really interested. Like, Jess, what do you think about them actively excluding corporal punishment from the scale?
I also found that interesting. Okay, so I guess in 2 parts, I thought it was, well, okay, maybe you would know better being, you know, a bit further in your research, Jenny. Do you think that is an ethical concern if it's an anonymous and it's for the purposes of research? Because I was questioning whether or not they, you know, needed to sort of go that far in their assessment of if they included it, that then they would have an obligation to follow up. Because how, you know,
it is interesting because
you
it's the
can't really
Northwest.
get people to do research if they think they're going to get in trouble. And then so how do we find out this information?
Yeah, well, like here's the really interesting thing. The study was conducted in the Northwest United States. It's not illegal to spank your child in the United States. Corporal punishment is not illegal. And I'm not sure that it's considered child abuse. So it's very possible that their ethics committee was just like, nope, if you can't identify and like say that you're like, maybe, I don't know, like, I don't know what the 3 questions are for the corporal punishment, but if it captures child abuse, I mean, spanking is child abuse in some countries, but not in the US. I don't know. Maybe they just like preempt.
So this is just from the perspective of a biologist, but it's true that they are extremely, in the US, when I worked in Boston, they were extremely harsh on anonymity, even for samples. Because, and I'm not sure if in this case it's related, but because of healthcare, and because if it's anonymous, then you really have to be careful, because you don't want healthcare providers to prevent someone to receive care because of the sample that we found out and stuff like that. So I'm not sure. I know that there is something really strong compared to other countries I've worked in with this. Be really careful that all the data is anonymous. And I don't know if in that case they would have to report or anonymize the data or something like that. But I would say the ethics committee in the US is probably one of the toughest that I've encountered personally.
Yeah. It's definitely interesting. I mean, it would have been interesting to see how this data correlated with it, but we also don't need it necessarily. And I think it's probably captured. They did measure, where is it? There was like an invalidating an invalidating or minimizing comment, which was like the example, you really haven't been putting your bike away, so it's only natural that I thought it was yours. And that's in response to apology effectiveness. So if someone put that in their comment, like shifting the blame when, this needs more context, but basically the parent is shifting the blame of their wrongdoing onto their child who is innocent. That might capture the same kind of authoritarian parenting that corporal punishment would, but it was just really interesting. Okay, so
can we skip back to the positive parenting point? Because I just looked up the Alabama parenting questionnaire and found some of the other examples. And I think it's kind of important to have this context because it might not be the idea of positive parenting that we would probably imagine. Yes. And because the example they gave in the paper piqued my interest when I read that to start with, because I thought, that's interesting, because there's literate or like talk, discourse, and I haven't really looked into the literature much, but around like praise and how you praise and that sort of thing. And so the other examples in the questionnaire, there's you praise your child if he or she behaves well, you compliment your child when he or she does something well, you reward or give something extra to your child for obeying you or behaving well. So that is so I think it's probably pretty important to understand what positive parenting meant in this paper, and it might not be what we would even immediately think, let alone the people listening.
So it's reward. It's verbal and physical reward behaviors. That is not what.
So it's old-fashioned positive parenting. Like it's
positive reinforcement. That's what it is. It's not positive parenting, it's positive reinforcement.
Yeah, but at the time, I don't know.
Very behavioral, really.
Yeah, okay.
I think in the past, this was like the best parent you could be or the most patient you could be, right? I feel.
Yes, absolutely.
Nowadays, we have other ideas about what positive.
And this is kind of, going down that tangent a little bit, but it's like, if you think about how now we know there's differences between, praising the child compared to praising their effort, or like focusing on the behavior compared to the, what's underlying the behavior. And so, I'd be interested to that kind of makes this a little bit different.
Yeah, it is a bit misleading, isn't it? Although positive parenting is kind of still like behaviorism skewed. It's not gentle parenting, because who does Triple P, the positive parenting program here, is very behavioral and behaviorism focused. So maybe we have a different concept of what positive parenting is than the literature. The literature might be that positive parenting is still positive behavior and positive reinforcement. But yeah, you're right, Laura, that this study, the Alabama parenting questionnaire, is from 91. So it is a different time and place and context. Still interesting, but like I feel like we can take the positive parenting findings with a grain of salt, because that's more just about behaviorism than anything else.
I also feel like it is in opposition with the purpose of the study, because I feel like apologizing to your child is indeed positive parenting. Yeah, like we see it, if that makes sense, as opposed to this whole praise, compliment, rewarding thing that is more like, yeah,
definitely. And we just had Cara Goodwin join us. Hey, Cara.
Hi, everyone. I'm sorry I'm late.
That is so fine, Cara. What we've done so far is we've summarized the study. We've talked about what I think that's all we've really done. We've talked about what positive parenting is in this study. Jess, do you want to do a quick summary for Cara about what we discovered positive parenting is in this study?
Sure. So they assessed it looking at parenting behaviors using the Alabama parenting questionnaire, I think it's called, and the items that indicate, where someone falls on the positive parenting spectrum were essentially around reward, positive reinforcement. So letting your child know when they do a good job, complimenting them when they do something well, telling them, they're good when they obey you, and that kind of thing. So just to sort of really separate it from like gentle parenting, for example, where people might have thought that that's what positive parenting was indicating.
Yes, that's interesting. Yeah, positive parenting is not very well defined, I feel like, in most studies.
Definitely. We kind of landed on the triple P definition of positive parenting. The triple P program is the positive parenting program. That's an evidence-based parenting program. It started at University of Queensland in Australia, and is now worldwide. But yeah, we kind of landed on positive parenting might be more behaviorism centric, which is interesting. Well, since you're here, Cara, what interesting thing or tidbit or topic do you want to talk about from this paper?
So full disclosure, I did not get the chance to read the whole paper.
Okay, neither do we.
Horrible.
Same.
Very interesting, and I would love to dive into some of the more surprising correlations they found and why we think that might have been, because I can think of some explanations, but I'm interested to hear what you guys think.
Yeah, let's do it. Well, actually, before we do that, let's just cover off the apology effectiveness and proclivity to apologize so that everyone listening at home knows what we're talking about. So there are two primary measures where maternal proclivity to apologize, which is a standardized measure. So it's a questionnaire that's already been done, and it's been validated in 2017 was the first time they did it, and I think it's been used quite a few times now. The examples of questions I ask is things like, I don't like to admit to my child that I'm wrong, and then you rate how likely you are to kind of align with that. Another example is, I have a tendency to apologize to my children. And yeah, it's ranked from 1 is strong disagreement and 7 is strong agreement with all of those statements. So it's a currently validated scale, and that's the one they used. And then the maternal apology effectiveness one seems to be something that they have designed for this specific study. And I found this really interesting. So they asked a vignette. Now I'm going to read out the vignette so everyone knows what we're talking about. And by the way, a vignette's like a little story. So we give the parent this story, and this is what they're told. Please read the following paragraph describing a situation that a mum encounters in her daily life. You will be serving as a coach to this mum. When prompted, please provide the mum with the words that she should say to her child. A mum has been trying to get her 9-year-old child to take better care of their possessions and to treat their possessions more responsibly. The mum arrives home after a long, stressful day. She sees that her child's new bicycle is left outside, even after she had told her child to put it inside earlier that day. She confronts her child and begins yelling at them. She's so angry that she doesn't allow her child to say anything. Her child begins to cry. When the child is able to speak, the child tells the mum that the bike outside is not their bike. They did indeed put their bike away, and the child is not at fault. The mum feels guilty about overreacting and blaming her child, and she wants to apologize. Please write the exact words that the mum should say to her child verbatim, which is word for word. Please do not include any identifying information about you and your child, just as a, ethical clause there. Now, they coded mother's written responses to that scenario for the presence or absence of 6 specific primary apology components that have been identified in other theoretical and empirical apology literature. So essentially what they were looking for was these 6 things: remorse/regret, e.g. I'm sorry for yelling at you; acknowledgement of unjust events, e.g. yelling at you was wrong; acknowledgement of emotions and or suffering, e.g. I can see that I hurt your feelings; promise of forbearance, e.g. I promise that I will work on this in the future; offer of repair, what can I do to make you feel better right now; and explanation, I yelled at you because I had a rough day and jumped to conclusions. So these are what are argued to be generally good components of an effective apology in the literature. And then they added a couple more that they called exploratory. So there was a term of endearment or love, i.e. I love you, sweetie; an expression of gratitude, thank you for putting your bike away. And this one was really interesting. An invalidating or minimizing comment, e.g. you really haven't been putting your bike away, so it was only natural that I thought it was yours. And what they found from those metrics, just in terms of like the quantity, was that 98% of parents expressed regret or remorse in their scenario apology. 73% acknowledged the unjust events, so acknowledging that the parent was in the wrong. 29% promised forbearance, I will try and do better. 12% acknowledged suffering. So very few people acknowledged that the kids' feelings were hurt. 7.5% were given an offer of repair, i.e., what can I do to make you feel better right now? So that's very low. There was 38% of parents had an expression of love and endearment. 38% also had an expression of gratitude, and 18% had a invalidating or minimizing comment. So there was much more invalidating comments than there were offers of repair. So that's the key measures that they looked at. So let's talk about some of these correlations. What did you find most interesting, Cara?
So in particular, the negative correlation between apology effectiveness and positive parenting. I was just looking for the citation. There is a previous study looking at these 5 parts of apologizing in parents, and it's Adams-Clark 2021. And in that study, let's see, they found parents on average include 2 of the 5 parts of an apology, and most mothers, the most frequently used component was the expression of regret and remorse. So there is there's some replication there, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was really interested in why that would be negatively related to positive parenting measures.
Yeah, I agree. And I think so in the discussion, they did make a point, and I think it's a good one, that mothers who self-reported engaging in more positive parenting, and remember, positive parenting, to the way we understand it, and I think most people understand it, is different from the way it's defined in the study. One possible explanation may be that mothers who engage in more positive parenting do not commit as severe transgressions that necessitate extensive apology with multiple apology components, and or use the simple phrase, "I'm sorry," more frequently, thereby also explaining why these mothers reported higher proclivity to apologize. I don't know if I buy that. Like that was the example they gave. Like I don't think that well, here's the thing. The way we think about positive parenting, the way it's presented on social media now is gentle parenting, and that's like parents taking the child's perspective. So you would think that a parent who is engaging in gentle or positive parenting, that they would be able to take a child's perspective, therefore they'd be able to give a more effective apology. These guys are kind of arguing that they aren't practiced at it, therefore they're not very good at giving an apology. But I don't know if I agree with that. What do you guys think?
I would agree with what you just said. And there was actually a couple of different explanations for, things that didn't match their hypotheses that I just thought were a little bit kind of like plucked out of thin air. We don't understand this. Here's a suggestion, which, I think we've all probably,
yes.
been involved in ourselves. It's not a criticism as such, but it's interesting because then it's like what's influencing, what are their biases in how they then decide what their alternative sort of explanation is to the finding that they found that they didn't expect to find. So that's always an interesting thing to read. But yeah, I would agree with you, Kristen, that even anecdotally, like I don't think that as a self-professed like gentle parent, or maybe I shouldn't actually equate myself, given that positive parenting and this is something very different, but I would say I'm pretty well practiced in giving apologies, and I don't know how good they all are, but I wouldn't say that I have less transgressions just because I'm a positive parent.
Definitely. I mean, what do you guys think about the way that apology effectiveness is measured? Is that going to contribute to it at all?
Oh, that's a good point, because what I was also thinking about, and I mean as well, we've got to consider it in the context and the age, but I was thinking, how would this change? How would it need to change depending on different ages? Because that's a lot of components to an apology to be giving like a 1 or 2 year old. And there's probably like more and less, impactful or important parts to it. But yeah, I think the effectiveness would just be really, really dependent on the child, the age, the situation. It's not always going to be practical to give a perfectly formulated apology, but that doesn't mean that a non-perfectly formulated apology can't be effective. I don't know, maybe that's just my opinion more than anything.
Laura, what do you think?
So the fact that there is a negative correlation between this apology effectiveness and positive parenting makes me think about what we were saying at the beginning, which is that for me, this definition of the positive parenting, which is very reward, is kind of going the opposite way with apologizing, like genuinely apologizing. And I feel like we have a lot of data on, the fact that reward doesn't really work that well. And so I'm just wondering.
In the long term.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering, what is the incentive for the apology? Is it kind of given as a reward? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then does that really have a positive consequence in the end?
That's a good question. Yeah. And what do you think, Cara?
I wonder if, this scenario, obviously, we can all agree it would have been better if they had looked at the mothers in a real life context and had looked at, how would they apologize in that context with their child. Obviously, that's not always possible in a research study for multiple reasons, but, and I thought this was kind of a creative way to look at it, but I wonder if people who are more likely to practice positive parenting just can't relate to the situation as much. And, it's just, this coming home and like getting angry without first assessing the situation. Not saying that a positive parent wouldn't do that, but maybe they would just be less likely to do that. And because they don't have as much practice with the actual situation, they're not as good at generating an apology off the top of their head. That would be the only explanation I could really come up with.
Yeah, I think that there's also something to, like, I get that they designed the question so that it was, I'm trying to get back to the question, but basically they made them a coach. So they kind of like imposed unsolicited advice upon them. And I wonder if like the act of trying to teach someone else what they should do might vary based on who the person is. So someone who is less likely to practice positive parenting is more likely to be someone that pushes their own ideals on somebody else, as a theory. And positive parents might be more likely to allow people space to decide what they do on their own. So when they come to like writing this example as a coach, they might be taking more of the coach mindset and not really taking like the script and word for word thing explicitly. So it would be really interesting to see how like this result would vary if, for example, it was just your child's done this, what do you say to them instead? I know that would lead to some biases, but this may also lead to different biases in personality and attitudes towards unsolicited advice in parenting.
I have to agree, because in that scenario, and that's one thing that jumped at me when you were giving the numbers earlier, a parent who would start yelling at their child because of this bike thing, I don't buy that there's only 18% of people who are invalidating.
Yeah.
Like, I think a lot of parents are like, no, I didn't do anything wrong. No, it was actually your fault because you did bad. And so I feel like, as you're saying, they're putting themselves in that character to imagine what they would do. And then they're like, oh, but if I'm this person, I'm not invalidating my child after. I mean, I'm guilty. I'm totally guilty of invalidating sometimes. Like, let's be honest.
Everyone is. It's hard to be.
I'm sorry, but.
Yeah.
I think it's really, it's a lot easier to say you shouldn't. Yeah.
Yes.
Kind of did something you weren't meant to do.
Yeah. Yes. I always have to remind myself that like, it's not a but. Don't say but. I'm sorry, I got frustrated. Not, I'm sorry, but you frustrated me. Like, it's no, I'm sorry, I got frustrated. I'm an adult. I have control over my prefrontal cortex more than you do. Anyways.
The key being more than you do.
More, not complete control.
Not total control.
Yeah.
Just more than you. Theoretically.
So that was really interesting. The positive parenting thing, I think it might have been more illuminating if it was a contrast between authoritative, authoritarian, and permissive parents.
Sure.
I feel like inconsistent discipline would have been captured in permissive parenting, as would poor monitoring and supervision. I think positive parenting and parental involvement would have been captured in authoritative parenting, and corporal punishment would have been captured in authoritarian parenting. So it might just be that the selection of this questionnaire led to differences. And so there's lots of things, there's lots of methodological reasons why this paper could be limited. It's just really interesting that they didn't mention any of that, I think, in the discussion, and why peer review didn't ask them to mention said things, because I, in my peer review, get asked a lot of things to be mentioned, every single possible. Anyways, I'm not there.
Yeah,
All
the
right.
limitations really just focused around the age and what else?
And that is not something that we talked about in this intro. We talked about it before we started recording, but the children in this study were between 7 and 12.
7 and 12.
Yeah, and it was a mean of 9. So they are a lot older. Let's just have a bit, before we keep going with the study, let's do a fun little thought experiment. Based on the 6 components of apology, how would we apply this to a 2 to 3-year-old? What would we say? Would we use remorse and regret statements? I'm sorry for yelling at you. Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
Totally. Acknowledgement of unjust events. Yelling at you was wrong.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I think you could.
Laura's just
I guess I'm trying to work out a little hierarchy in my head, right? Because I think a lot of them could have a place, but then just in practice, it might just be that sometimes, yeah. And for me, offer of repair would be one of likely the most important components of an apology. Yeah. And I mean, on here, it's so low. And, because of its relationship as well with secure attachment, repair and secure attachment, is that it's not that other ones I wouldn't use or recommend, but it's maybe if there were, I would like to almost see a hierarchy of, must, optional.
I do. That would be really cool. Maybe we should do a joint post on Instagram about that. But what I do think is that now here's the thing, maybe offer of repair is really low because they don't realize that repair can be physical. So repair can be a hug.
Yeah, this is the reason why I was not saying anything, because for a 2-3-year-old, I would, it's way simplified. I would not chit chat. I would just, show physically that I fucked up, basically. I think, and I mean, to be honest, this is what I do with my 7-year-old too. It's okay, let's shut up first. Your emotions are high. My emotions are high. It's really not the time to start chit chatting. It doesn't work on my child, at least. So that's why I was wait, this is too much. But I guess in the long run, yes, I would definitely start saying more things. But also, I don't know, my daughter's attention span is like this. So it's if I start blah, blah thing for it doesn't work.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's going to come down to each parent and each child. I don't necessarily think you need that much effectiveness. As long as you have some of it. And I think you're right, Jess, that repair is the most important, but I don't think that what's captured in this is that repair can be hugging. I think that when you are delivering a script, you aren't also describing the body language that goes around it and the tone. So that's really interesting. What do you think, Cara?
Yeah, I agree. With young children, keeping it minimal, if you pose to a toddler, what can I do to make it better? They're probably going to have a blank stare. They're saying, maybe giving them a choice. Do you want me to, play with you, or do you want to hug? What will make you feel better? Maybe giving 2 choices. And minimizing words as much as you could while getting the basic message across.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I think
Agreed.
when I do this in practice with my 3-year-old, it's, I'm sorry for yelling at you. I shouldn't have done that. I was frustrated. And now, like, that's it. And I'm hugging her while I'm doing it, and I'm trying to make her feel better, or I'm giving her options. So I think that is more than enough. I'm sorry for yelling at you. I shouldn't have done that. I was frustrated. Like, that's as far as we go. I don't know if we need more than that with older children too.
So for me, the other one that's interesting, that's very low, and I felt like that was the priority for me, was the acknowledgement of hurt, or I guess
Suffering,
acknowledgement
yeah.
of the emotion, because I feel like sometimes, and I don't know if you have this cycle of in your head as well, but it's like you inflicted the hurt and you still have to acknowledge the hurt, but I'm to blame because of the hurt and all this kind of thing. Which sometimes I find very confusing. But for me, that would be the first one, to be like, kind of forget about the situation. I can see you're having a hard time, and then kind of go more into why this happened, which is also why I feel like nowadays this study would interest me more if there was an apology, even if the parent didn't obviously mess up, like, I don't know if that makes sense. It makes sense in my head.
If just because, that it was their bike, but the parent recognizes that they shouldn't have yelled, even if it was a child. Yeah.
Definitely. There's
like there are a lot more parents who would invalidate that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like also there's probably a lot of circumstances where people don't even notice when they should apologize. So a child like gets yelled at, they probably don't even notice that that's something that they should apologize for. That's a thing that we all spend a great deal of time on the internet trying to tell parents they need to do. It's okay to yell, but well, it's not okay to yell, but like, if you do yell, all you have to do is repair. Like, just apologize, friends. And I think that's the biggest thing we should take away from this paper, right? Okay, what's next? Does anyone want to bring up another really important thing that they found from it?
I thought it was interesting how, expressing gratitude isn't always a part of an apology, but it was in this case because the child actually did put the bike away. So expressing gratitude within the apology was related to positive parenting behaviors. And given how positive parenting was defined, I don't think it's that surprising, but I do feel like that is an interesting finding, and I don't know if it applies to the typical apology. Like, how would you express gratitude within a typical apology? If you yelled at your child, for example, you wouldn't be like, I don't know, thank you for not yelling back at me. Like, I don't know what the gratitude would be, but I thought that was an interesting thing to think about.
That's a really good point. I do wonder, like, it only applies to this one vignette, but it is, they did say that this component came from, I hate this thing. Hold on. I've got the paper up so we can all see it now, but it's not working very well. So,
it was an additional exploratory component. Question. That's what you said. Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely is. So, and interestingly, the one that isn't an exploratory, so that one isn't informed by previous literature, but the one that is and wasn't included was explanation. And that's the one I use the most with my child, and I think most people would. And that's the I yelled because I had a rough day and jumped to conclusions, or I yelled because I'm frustrated, which is probably more likely our explanation, right? Yeah. They had trouble getting the raters to agree. So they excluded it because it didn't have good inter-rater reliability, which is where two people will like classify whether an explanation is present or absent. And their agreement was significantly lower. That was still 76%. So I don't know why they cut it out, but I thought that explanation would have been a good one to clarify, and potentially explanation would have been a good one to correlate with positive parenting, because it's all about noticing and acknowledging like good behavior and I assume, negative behavior too. So kind of interesting that got dropped.
Yeah, I agree with that, because also it doesn't sort of say whether this is another methodological thing, I guess. Like, when they did disagree, what was the process? Could they not get together and talk it out and decide whether it was, qualified or not?
It says down here, disagreement among coders was handled through discussion with the study team. So I don't know why they wouldn't have included the explanation component. Something seems off with that. Something seems like, I don't know why they wouldn't have included it. Like, you should have just resolved the disagreements. If it was 76% agreement, 76%, that's only 24% disagreements. That's enough to resolve. I don't know. I'm not stoked.
Yeah, and it was lower than the others, but 76.2, or, kappa 0.37, that's not that, that's okay, isn't it?
Yes. Like, it's not great.
Yeah, I think it's literally like, it's called like okay or something. What is it? Fair or something like that.
Yeah, like the quality is fair. I find it odd, especially when they're treating it like they didn't even bother summarizing the frequency of the explanation of apology components. Like, I get if they wouldn't want to put it in as correlations, but they didn't even summarize the frequency of them. So something is tricky there. Anyways, moving on.
Yeah, moving on.
Okay, what else do we want to talk about? So I found really interesting. This is really interesting. There was no significant differences in parental apology effectiveness or proclivity to apologize based on age, household income, race, ethnicity, relationship status, or sexual orientation. Now, some of these we know don't have an effect in terms of like parenting styles. There's not a significant difference, but some of these we know there is usually a significant difference between like SES. And so I found it interesting that they didn't find any differences here for parental apology. What do you guys think?
Yeah, it is interesting. I wonder if it's simply proclivity, then it's kind of not at all looking at the components of the apology. So there could still be, a lot of difference in I guess the components or the proportion of like invalidating statements or shifting blame and that kind of thing. Maybe it's like it's in the details, because as well, like, people can just be very, very accustomed to going, I'm sorry, and just not having much behind it. So if you just ask somebody, oh, do you apologize to your child, do you have and they think, oh yeah, I say sorry, but so just, I think the devil's in the details, probably.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they had a good range too. Like, for household income bracket, it was almost a third in each bracket, including below 35,000 for the household income, which, Kara, you probably know better than we do. Is 35,000 the poverty line in the US, or where does that sit, income for a family household?
I would think it is. I'm not 100% sure, but yeah, I thought that was a really good range. I kind of wonder if it goes back to the idea that, these were questionnaires. This was a made up scenario. And in a real life situation where real life stressors are playing a role, would you also see no difference in SES? Like, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, do we see more difference in SES as a function of like stress in general? Like, do people in a lower socioeconomic status experience higher levels of stress because they have to like stretch their money further, especially in an inflating economy? That is a good point.
Yeah.
We can't see any of the values. They haven't provided the values for like correlations between the groups for these things that we would commonly think would correlate with parenting style.
I was looking at the threshold. So 2021 for a 3-person household, I would guess. So with a child is $21,500
And that's what?
per year. US dollars?
Is that the poverty
That's
line?
the threshold. Yeah.
Okay.
US poverty threshold for 2021.
Right. And what are they
So
at?
it's a bit lower. You said 35,000?
I think I said 35, yeah. Yeah, 35,000. So below 35,000, there was 25% of the sample. 35 to 75,000 was 38% of the sample. And then above 75,000 was 37% of the sample, which I think those numbers would be drastically different in Australia for multiple reasons. But this is a Northwestern United States sample. So that's also something to keep in mind. And what was their ethnicity? The majority of the mothers identified as 93% white, 94% Hispanic, non-Hispanic Latino. What? How can you have 93% white and 94% Hispanic Latino? Can someone, Cara, you're the American?
I that does not make any sense. I'm trying to think that it might be a typo and that maybe they meant
4%.
Yeah, that would be 1% Latino. I don't know.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it?
Can it be
that
mixed?
does make sense.
Like, I mean, from experience, like I'm white and Latino, so I don't know if people might have ticked multiple boxes.
That's a very big portion of the sample to be mixed.
Yeah, that's true.
So I think what they're trying to say is 93% are white and 94% are not Hispanic or Latino. So that would mean 1% identified as Hispanic and Latino, right?
No, 6%? 5.6%? If it's 94.4%.
Why don't we just say that?
This is very confusing.
Yeah. I'm trying to see if there's like a table that
percentage is not this.
Okay, so moral of the story is the reason that there may not have been correlations is because the majority of the sample was white and the majority of the sample was also heterosexual. So there may have been too limited variation for them to actually be able to test whether there was effects of these things. And we don't necessarily know whether there would have been, but because there's a lack of variation in the sample, we can't say for certain whether propensity to apologize would vary. And I think what would be really interesting is to look at whether the propensity to apologize and how it affects children's behavior varies across cultures. Like I think the difference between like an individualistic culture like the US and a collectivistic culture like where Laura is now in Japan might be very different. That would be really cool. Anyways.
About this income thing, I wonder how they separated the income depending on the number of children in the family. Like, did they just take the income and put the family in that bracket, or did they average depending on the number of people in the family? I don't know if that's something that you guys commonly do. I've never done that before, so I really have no idea personally.
No, we just take the average household income. And that's it. So we don't really average. There are
for
different,
the number. Okay.
Yeah. So there's different and better socioeconomic status indicators like the Hollingshead. I don't know how to say it. And then you can also use things like maternal education are really reliably predictive of socioeconomic status. But yeah, generally it's just how much does mum and dad bring into the household? That's it. So that's really interesting. Was there any other surprising findings that you guys came across, or is it all pretty much standard? Silence.
So I was interested in when they were talking about inconsistent discipline, because I don't know. I was just thinking personally, I feel like being consistent is so hard. And I feel like the fact that you apologize is kind of a countermeasure for the fact that you're inconsistent sometimes, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Jess, do you still have the examples up there of what the Alabama parenting questionnaire has for inconsistent discipline? Because maybe the other examples will tell us a little bit more about what parents were actually responding to on that. Because it was in the right direction. So it's not an unexpected finding. Inconsistent discipline was negatively related to apologizing, and that means that parents who apologize are more consistent. But yeah, I don't know if that is it. Jess?
Yeah, so the examples in here, and because it is a Likert scale of never is 1 to 5 always. So I guess that's how they assess whether it was consistent or not, because if people said, yeah, like sometimes or whatever it might be. So you let your child out of a punishment early, e.g. lift restrictions earlier than you originally said. Your child is not punished when she has done something wrong. You give your child extra chores as punishment. You use timeout.
What?
These are use timeout might have been a different one actually. But yeah, you yell or scream at your child when she has done something wrong. So yeah, I guess they'd just be looking at whether people say never, sometimes, always.
But those questions, like, I get that they were clustered together, but they are not necessarily reflective of inconsistent discipline unless parents are responding inconsistently to those disciplinary questions. That's because like one of them should have a strong correlation with apologies. You yell and scream at your child. Maybe that's the one that's driving this effect of a propensity to apologize is negatively related with inconsistent discipline. It's just related to like whether or not if you have a proclivity to apologize, it's just related to whether you actually do or not after you yell and scream. I don't know. What do you guys think about that now that we know the questions?
I think I'd really like to see this research with a different questionnaire.
Yes.
To add to not, we choose things for a range of reasons, and this is still informative, but I think it would be interesting to tease apart parenting behaviors in a different way. I think it would be helpful.
Yeah. I think it's a good preliminary study. It's laying a foundation for which we can improve upon, and other researchers will do what we've just done, and that's look through it, question the validity of some of the measures, figure out how to improve upon the limitations. I just think the only thing that was a little bit disappointing, especially I feel like the Journal of Applied Developmental Psychology, I don't know, but it is an Elsevier journal, which usually means it's a pretty good quality journal. That they wouldn't have asked for more alternative explanation. Potentially, I don't know if it's a brief report, but potentially they didn't have the space. But I would have expected more, like a higher standard of like thinking about why their study might have found what it did in the discussion than what they said. So,
yeah, I
okay.
agree with that.
Any other departing remarks about today's paper?
I feel like it might be interesting, and tell me if you guys don't want to do this, but we all go around and say like, what's like the one big takeaway message you would take from this paper?
Oh yeah, that's cool. You can start,
maybe
Cara.
We all have the same takeaway message.
Probably. You can start, Cara.
I mean, I think it's simply that, we have, some preliminary evidence that apologizing to your child is associated with a more positive parenting style. And, I think just the main takeaway is, apologizing to your child can't hurt.
Yeah.
We need more research though.
For sure. Laura?
So as a sleep scientist perspective and everything with the sleep, I think this is really important to kind of emphasize, just because when we talk about sleep, we're like, what time should I put my child to sleep, or like these kind of basic factors. And I feel like all this emotional stuff, like if, for example, your child goes to bed and you've screamed at them and you haven't apologized, then they might take 2 hours to fall asleep, because this is going to go round and round in their head, depending on their age, obviously. So I think it's very comforting to see that they're putting emphasis on this, like, and not just being a gentle parent, but really like the act of apologizing and how that can impact. And I would say that it would play a big role in sleep as well.
That's cool. That's a nice perspective. And Jess?
Yeah, so I mean, I think I probably would have made it similar to Kara's, but beat me to it, of course. But on building on that, I think as well, one of my takeaways, and maybe it's also more from our conversations too, but that apologies can kind of take different forms. They don't have to be perfect. They will likely depend on your child, their age, and I'd like to see more research in those sort of, differences. But that it definitely can't hurt to apologize, and it might help. And it doesn't seem to be related to, I mean, again, we need more research here, but if we're going to just focus on the positive parenting construct as it is, that it certainly doesn't seem to be related to like less effective parenting in general, or being a doormat or something like that. Like a lot of people might kind of equate it or conflate it with permissive parenting behaviors and that sort of thing.
For sure. And I think my major takeaway is one that we didn't really spend a lot of time talking about, and that's on the child behaviors. Apology does not just seem to not hurt, but it seems to help. It seems to help in terms of improving child internalizing and externalizing behaviors. And maybe it's not the apology itself. That's something we haven't talked about. But just the fact that a parent has a propensity to apologize probably means that parent has a propensity to take their child's perspective more. And these are things that we know correlate with internalizing and externalizing behaviors. So knowing that having this attribute, engaging in this kind of activity, this perspective taking with your child activity, and taking ownership of when you've done the wrong thing, is related to better outcomes for your child. They're happier, they're mentally more healthy, and then they treat others with the same kind of kindness that you show them in terms of prosocial behaviors. So I think those things, we kind of got bogged down in the limitations of this paper, but those things are really important. And it's hard to say what causes what, but one thing we do know is that taking a child's perspective is incredibly important. And this is a really good way to practice that, because you have to notice yourself, you have to notice your child, and you have to use that theory of mind that we developed at 4 years old.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thank you everyone for coming to Journal Club. Next week we are talking about something very fun. It's a sleep training paper.
Oh,
yay! Oh,
my
I can't wait.
My sleep scientist
the one
in
you
the room.
shared this week.
That one, yes, the Nanit sleep training paper.
Oh no. Okay.
Yes, it's very fun. We will talk about that one next week. Thank you everyone for listening to Journal Club. We will see you next week.
See you next week.